In a league dominated by loud personalities and high-flying highlights, one man quietly crafted a career built on pure skill and cold-blooded execution. He didn't chase fame. He didn't make headlines. He just gave buckets. And yet, the league moved on, like he never existed. February 2010, Atlanta Hawks vs. Cleveland Cavaliers. LeBron James had just tied the game with a brilliant drive to the basket. But with 1.9 seconds left, Joe Johnson catches the inbound pass, faces up his defender. Bucket. Game over. No celebration. No chest pounding. Just another day at the office for the man they called ISO Joe. This was Joe Johnson, a player so smooth, so methodical, so devastatingly effective that defenders knew what was coming but still couldn't stop it. Let these numbers sink in. 7 All-Star appearances. 6 straight seasons averaging over 20 points per game. More career points than Scottie Pippen. More game winners than Reggie Miller. This is the story of a player whose prime was so smooth, so lethal, it deserved to be celebrated. But instead, it was ignored, overlooked, forgotten. This is the prime the NBA chose to forget. Welcome to Fynk, where forgotten legends live again. If you're someone who still remembers what real hoopers look like, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Let's bring justice to the stories the league forgot. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most underappreciated careers in modern NBA history. So sit back, and let's give this man his flowers. Before we get into why Joe Johnson's prime deserves more recognition, we need to understand how he got there. Because Joe's journey itself tells us a lot about the player he would become. Joe Johnson was born in Little Rock, Arkansas, on June 29, 1981. At Little Rock Central High School, he emerged as a star, eventually becoming a McDonald's All-American. He stayed home for college, choosing the University of Arkansas. In 2 seasons with the Razorbacks, Johnson showed flashes of the all-around game that would define his career: smooth shooting, crafty ball handling, and surprising strength for a wing player. In the loaded 2001 NBA draft, Johnson was selected 10th overall by the Boston Celtics. Think about some names from that draft: Pau Gasol, Tony Parker, Tyson Chandler, Zach Randolph. Johnson belongs in that conversation of impact players, even if the narrative never framed him that way. His time in Boston was brief and unremarkable. As a rookie, he struggled to find consistent minutes under coach Jim O'Brien's system. The Celtics, always impatient for stars, didn't see Johnson as a cornerstone. Midway through his rookie season, Boston traded him to Phoenix in a package for veterans Tony Delk and Rodney Rogers, a win-now move that would look increasingly short-sighted as Johnson developed. In Phoenix, Johnson began to flourish. Playing alongside Stephon Marbury and a young Amare Stoudemire, he showed the versatility and calm demeanor that would become his trademark. But the real turning point came in 2004, when the Suns brought in Steve Nash and transformed into the 7 seconds or less offensive juggernaut. Johnson became a perfect complement to Nash's wizardry and Stoudemire's power. In the 2004 to 2005 season, he averaged 17.1 points per game, shot an incredible 47.8% from three-point range, and helped the Suns secure the best record in the NBA. But in a cruel twist of fate, Johnson suffered a facial fracture during the 2005 playoffs against Dallas. He missed 2 games before returning, with a mask, showing the toughness that belied his smooth exterior. The Suns would lose to eventual champion San Antonio in the Western Conference Finals. And that summer, everything changed for Joe Johnson. Phoenix was prepared to keep Johnson, but not at max money. The Atlanta Hawks, desperate for a franchise cornerstone, offered him a 5-year, $70 million deal. When the Suns hesitated to match, Johnson made it clear he wanted out. It was a decision that would define his career in more ways than one. Analysts quote, "The move to Atlanta was pivotal for Joe. In Phoenix, he was part of an ensemble cast. In Atlanta, he became the main attraction. But it also meant trading winning for individual growth. That trade-off would shape how the basketball world viewed him for years to come." Zach Lowe. From 2006 to 2012, Joe Johnson transformed from a promising role player to a bona fide NBA star. And he did it in Atlanta, not exactly a premier NBA market in the mid-2000s. When Johnson arrived in Atlanta for the 2005 to 2006 season, the Hawks were basketball purgatory. They had won just 13 games the previous year. They hadn't made the playoffs since 1999. They needed everything, and Johnson was asked to provide it all. In his first season with the Hawks, Johnson put up career numbers across the board, but the team won only 26 games. This became the narrative trap that would follow him for years. Great stats on a bad team. But Joe was just getting started. By his second season in Atlanta, Johnson had established himself as one of the league's premier scoring guards. awards. He averaged 25 points per game, earning his first All-Star selection. The Hawks still struggled, winning just 30 games, but Johnson's reputation as a scorer was growing. What made Johnson special wasn't just his scoring, it was how he scored. Against constant defensive attention, with few reliable teammates to create space, Johnson developed an isolation game that was virtually unstoppable. They called him ISO Joe. Give him the ball, clear out the floor, and let the master go to work. His signature move? The devastating step-back jumper. Johnson had mastered the art of creating just enough space to get his shot off, using his 6 feet 7 inches frame and surprising strength to keep defenders at bay. Former NBA defender quote, "Guarding Joe was maddening. You knew what was coming, but you still couldn't stop it. He had this subtle push-off, not enough to get called, but enough to create space. And once he got into his shooting motion, it was over. All you could do was hope he missed." Shane Battier. The numbers don't lie. During his Atlanta prime, Johnson was consistently among the league's most efficient isolation scorers. In the 2009-10 season, he scored 1.01 points per isolation possession, elite efficiency for such a high-volume ISO player. As Johnson elevated his game, the Hawks slowly improved around him. By 2008, with a core that now included Al Horford and Josh Smith, Atlanta made the playoffs for the first time in Johnson's tenure. They would make the postseason in each of his final 5 seasons with the team. The 2009-10 season represented the peak of Johnson's Hawks tenure. Atlanta won 53 games. Johnson made his 4th straight All-Star team, and the Hawks reached the second round of the playoffs. For a franchise that had been irrelevant for a decade, this was remarkable progress. Joe gave us an identity. He was our closer, our go-to guy when we needed a bucket. Every great team needs someone who can create his own shot when the play breaks down, and Joe was elite at that. He changed the culture in Atlanta. Mike Woodson. During this period, Johnson earned another nickname, Joe Jesus. As teammate Kevin Garnett would later explain, he might not be there when you call on him, but he's there when you need him. From 2008 to 2012, Johnson hit 15 game winners or game-tying shots in the final 10 seconds. Only Kobe Bryant and Carmelo Anthony had more during that span. In the final minute of games within 5 points, Johnson shot over 43%, well above the league average in such situations. But even in these moments of brilliance, Johnson remained stoic. No chest pounding, no mean mugging, no screaming into the cameras, just a slight nod, maybe a restrained fist pump, then back to business. And perhaps that's where the disconnect began. In an era where personality increasingly drove NBA narratives, Johnson refused to play that game. Enjoying the breakdown? This is exactly the kind of story mainstream NBA coverage ignores. Hit that subscribe button right now and join us at Fynk, where we tell the stories no one else will. And don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss our weekly deep dives. To understand why Joe Johnson's prime has been forgotten, or worse, dismissed, we need to talk about the summer of 2010, and a contract that would forever change how people viewed his career. The 2010 NBA offseason was unlike any other. LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, Amare Stoudemire, and many other stars were free agents. The basketball world was fixated on where these players would land. And then, on July 4th, while everyone was focused on the Miami Big Three drama, the Atlanta Hawks re-signed Joe Johnson to a 6-year, $123.7 million contract. At the time, it was the largest contract in NBA history. The backlash was immediate and severe. Johnson was a very good player, undoubtedly an all-star. But $123.7 million? More than Kobe? More than LeBron? The contract instantly became labeled as one of the worst in NBA history, before Johnson had played a single game under it. Media soundbite. I like Joe Johnson. He's a terrific player, but this contract is indefensible. You don't pay a good player like he's a transformational superstar. The Hawks have hamstrung themselves for years to come. ESPN analysts lost in the outrage over the contract was a simple truth. Joe Johnson didn't offer himself that money. The Hawks, desperate to maintain relevance and fearful of losing their franchise player, made the offer. Johnson simply accepted it, as any rational person would. But from that moment on, Johnson wasn't judged as Joe Johnson, 7-time All-Star. He was judged as Joe Johnson, overpaid star who wasn't worth his contract. The cruel irony? Johnson continued to perform at an All-Star level after signing the deal. In the 2010-11 season, he averaged 18.2 points, 4.7 assists, and 4.0 rebounds per game. He made his 5th consecutive All-Star team, but the contract narrative overshadowed everything else. Every missed shot, every playoff disappointment was now viewed through the lens of $123.7 million. The hardest thing about this business sometimes is that your contract becomes your identity. Joe was the same player before and after that deal, consistent, reliable, clutch. But suddenly, people couldn't see beyond the dollar signs. Jamal Crawford. By the 2011-12 season, it was clear that the Hawks had reached their ceiling with Johnson as the centerpiece. They were a perennial playoff team but not a championship contender. They had become stuck in the dreaded NBA middle ground, too good to rebuild, not good enough to truly contend. With new ownership taking over in Atlanta and a desire to reshape the roster, the unthinkable happened. Just 2 years into his untradeable contract, Joe Johnson was traded. On July 11, 2012, Johnson was sent to the Brooklyn Nets for a package of expiring contracts and a protected first-round pick. The Hawks had decided to move on from the Joe Johnson era. And with that move, one of the most consistent prime stretches in recent NBA history came to an unceremonious end. But here's what gets lost in the contract talk. During his 7 seasons in Atlanta, Joe Johnson averaged 20.9 points, 4.2 rebounds, and 5.2 assists per game. He made 7 consecutive All-Star teams. He led a franchise from irrelevance to respectability. By any objective measure, that's an incredible run. So why isn't it celebrated? So why was Joe Johnson never treated like a superstar? Why isn't his prime discussed alongside other great wings of his era? The answers reveal as much about NBA culture as they do about Johnson himself. First, there's the personality factor. Johnson was notoriously quiet and reserved. He didn't seek the spotlight. He didn't engage in trash talk. He didn't create sound bites for ESPN to run on a loop. In an era where player personality was becoming increasingly important to NBA marketing, Johnson was a throwback. He let his game speak for itself. Joe was incredibly difficult to interview. Not because he was rude, he was always professional, but because he gave you nothing quotable. No controversy, no bold proclamations. That made him nearly impossible to build stories around. NBA reporter. Then there's the market factor. Atlanta, despite being a major city, was not a premier NBA market during Johnson's tenure. Hawks games were rarely featured on national TV. The team often played in a half-empty Phillips Arena. Compare that to players in New York, Los Angeles, or Boston, whose every move was dissected by national media. Johnson simply didn't have the platform that his talent deserved. Perhaps most significantly, Johnson's game itself wasn't designed for the highlight era. In a league increasingly obsessed with posterizing dunks and deep three-pointers, Johnson's methodical, mid-range heavy isolation game wasn't made for SportsCenter. He lived in the space between. The lost art of mid-range mastery. The step-back jumper from 18 feet doesn't go viral. The perfectly executed pick-and-roll doesn't make the top 10 plays. But these were the bread and butter of Johnson's arsenal. Let's put Johnson's prime in context by comparing his 2006 to 2012 stretch to some contemporaries. Joe Johnson, 2006 to 12, 21.0 ppg, 4.4 rpg, 5.2 apg, 7 All-Star appearances. Paul Pierce, same period, 20.4 ppg, 5.6 rpg, 3.7 apg, 5 All-Star appearances. Vince Carter, same period, 19.9 ppg, 4.6 rpg, 3.6 apg, 3 All-Star appearances. Johnson's numbers hold up remarkably well. Yet Pierce and Carter are celebrated as icons of the era, while Johnson is largely forgotten. The difference? Market, personality, and narrative. Of course, we can't ignore the playoff factor. Johnson's Hawks never advanced beyond the second round of the playoffs. Fair or unfair, NBA legacies are built on postseason success. But here's where context matters. Those Hawks teams were never constructed to be true contenders. Johnson was asked to be a number 1 option when his game was perhaps better suited to being a devastating number 2. Put Joe Johnson on those Celtics teams instead of Ray Allen, and they probably still win a championship. Put him on the Lakers with Kobe and Powell, same thing. Joe wasn't necessarily built to be the guy, but he was perfect as a co-star. Atlanta just never got him that equal or superior running mate. Basketball analyst, and yet, he never made an All-NBA first team, never received a single MVP vote, 7 straight All-Star appearances, but minimal recognition beyond that. In a league that sells drama, Joe was too quiet, too steady, too professional. He didn't demand your attention, but if you watched closely, you couldn't ignore him. The league overlooked Joe Johnson not because he wasn't great, but because his greatness didn't fit the template the NBA wanted to market. We're digging deep into one of the NBA's most underappreciated careers. If you're enjoying this breakdown of Joe Johnson's forgotten prime, make sure you're subscribed to Fynk. We've got so much more coming out, including Joe's Brooklyn years and his incredible international rejuvenation. Hit subscribe now so you don't miss our weekly deep dives. In 2012, Atlanta traded Joe Johnson to the Brooklyn Nets. It marked the end of an era, and just like that, one of the most efficient primes in recent memory began to fade from view. The Brooklyn Nets were in a unique position. They had just relocated from New Jersey, moved into the gleaming new Barclays Center, and were desperate to make a splash in the New York market. Trading for Joe Johnson, despite his massive contract, was part of that splash. Johnson joined a roster featuring Deron Williams and Brook Lopez, forming what Brooklyn hoped would be a big three capable of challenging Miami and Boston in the East. For Johnson, the move represented both an opportunity and a challenge. The opportunity to play in the New York market, to potentially compete for a championship. The challenge of adapting to a new role, no longer the unquestioned first option. In his first season with the Nets, Johnson's numbers decreased as expected, 16.3 points per game, down nearly 4 points from his Atlanta average. But he remained the team's closer, the player they trusted when the game was on the line. He still had moments, still hit game winners, still showed flashes of that ISO magic. But the league had already turned the page. A new generation of wing players was emerging. James Harden was revolutionizing the shooting guard position in Houston. Paul George was ascending in Indiana. Jimmy Butler was developing in Chicago. The conversation had moved on from Joe Johnson. Age and injuries began to take their toll. Johnson's minutes gradually decreased. His efficiency remained solid, but the explosiveness that had once allowed him to create separation was fading. The Nets' experiment ultimately failed. After mortgaging their future to acquire aging stars Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce, Brooklyn made just 2 playoff appearances with Johnson, never advancing beyond the second round. In February 2016, the Nets and Johnson agreed to a buyout. He would sign with the Miami Heat for the remainder of the season, a small footnote in a career that deserved much more attention. What followed was a journeyman phase, stints with the Jazz, Rockets, and brief appearances with the Pistons and Celtics. Johnson was no longer a star, but a veteran role player, valued for his experience and occasional clutch shooting rather than his overall game. In 2019, Johnson found an unexpected new platform, the Big Three League. Playing in Ice Cube's 3-on-3 competition, Johnson dominated, winning MVP honors and reminding basketball fans of his isolation brilliance. It was a bittersweet coda, Johnson excelling in a second-tier league, while his NBA contributions faded from collective memory. Big Three quote, "Joe is still Joe. Give him the ball in isolation, and good luck stopping him. The handles, the footwork, the touch, that stuff doesn't just disappear. He's showing these young guys what a real hooper looks like." Ice Cube. His Big Three success even earned him one last NBA shot, a brief contract with Detroit in 2019. But at 38, time had finally caught up with Joe Johnson. The career was over, and with it ended one of the most underappreciated prime stretches in modern NBA history. Joe Johnson scored 20,405 points in his NBA career, made 7 All-Star teams, hit more clutch shots than most Hall of Famers, and did it all with humility and grace. Let's put Johnson's career in historical context. His 20,405 points rank 45th all-time, more than Hall of Famers like Scottie Pippen, David Robinson, and Bob Pettit. Among shooting guards, only 11 players in NBA history scored more points. His 7 consecutive All-Star selections speak to his consistent excellence. During that stretch from 2007 to 2012, only 5 players made every All-Star team: LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, Dwayne Wade, Dirk Nowitzki, and Joe Johnson. That's elite company. Perhaps Johnson's most lasting legacy should be his clutch performance. Few players in the 2000s were more reliable in game-deciding situations. From 2007 to 2013, Johnson hit 13 game-winning buzzer beaters, the most in the NBA during that span. In games within 5 points in the final minute, he shot 49.1%, compared to the league average of around 40%. When the pressure was highest, Johnson was at his best. Player quote 1. "Joe was that dude. We all knew it. When we needed a bucket, there was no question who was getting the ball, and he delivered time after time." Al Horford. Player quote 2. "One of the most skilled players I've ever seen. His footwork, his handle, how he could get to his spot despite everyone knowing what was coming. That's rare. That's special. Paul Pierce player quote 3. You ask players around the league who they respected. Joe's name always comes up. He wasn't flashy, didn't talk trash, just came to work and got buckets. Real recognize real. Kevin Durant Johnson's impact on the Atlanta Hawks franchise can't be overstated. Before his arrival, they were a basketball wasteland, having missed the playoffs for 6 straight years. With Johnson, they made 5 straight postseason appearances, including 3 trips to the second round. He didn't just produce for the Hawks, he gave them an identity. Basketball purists still marvel at Johnson's technical prowess. His package of moves was straight out of a coaching clinic. The hesitation dribble, the perfect footwork on the step back, the ability to shoot over either shoulder in the post. He wasn't just scoring, he was doing it with textbook precision. But culture and narrative shaped legacy as much as performance. And this is where Johnson's legacy suffered. O's signature shoe line. No memorable commercials, no viral moments, no social media presence. In the modern NBA, these things matter, perhaps as much as what happens on the court. Johnson played in an era where the business of basketball was changing, but he remained old school to the core. Will Joe Johnson make the Hall of Fame? The numbers suggest he should be in the conversation. 7 All-Star appearances, over 20,000 points. Joe Johnson scored 20,405 points in his NBA career, made 7 All-Star teams, hit more clutch shots than most Hall of Famers, and did it all with humility and grace. Let's put Johnson's career in historical context. His 20,405 points rank 45th all-time, more than Hall of Famers like Scottie Pippen, David Robinson, and Bob Pettit. Among shooting guards, only 11 players in NBA history scored more points. His 7 consecutive All-Star selections speak to his consistent excellence. During that stretch from 2007 to 2012, only 5 players made every All-Star team: LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, Dwayne Wade, Dirk Nowitzki, and Joe Johnson. That's elite company. Perhaps Johnson's most lasting legacy should be his clutch performance. Few players in the 2000s were more reliable in game-deciding situations. From 2007 to 2013, Johnson hit 13 game-winning buzzer beaters, the most in the NBA during that span. In games within 5 points in the final minute, he shot 49.1%, compared to the league average of around 40%. When the pressure was highest, Johnson was at his best. Player quote 1. Joe was that dude. We all knew it. When we needed a bucket, there was no question who was getting the ball, and he delivered time after time. Al Horford player quote 2. One of the most skilled players I've ever seen. His footwork, his handle, how he could get to his spot despite everyone knowing what was coming. That's rare. That's special. Paul Pierce player quote 3. You ask players around the league who they respected. Joe's name always comes up. He wasn't flashy, didn't talk trash, just came to work and got buckets. Real recognize real. Kevin Durant Johnson's impact on the Atlanta Hawks franchise can't be overstated. Before his arrival, they were a basketball wasteland, having missed the playoffs for 6 straight years. With Johnson, they made 5 straight postseason appearances, including 3 trips to the second round. He didn't just produce for the Hawks, he gave them an identity. Basketball purists still marvel at Johnson's technical prowess. His package of moves was straight out of a coaching clinic. The hesitation dribble, the perfect footwork on the step back, the ability to shoot over either shoulder in the post. He wasn't just scoring, he was doing it with textbook precision. But culture and narrative shaped legacy as much as performance. And this is where Johnson's legacy suffered. O's signature shoe line. No memorable commercials, no viral moments, no social media presence. In the modern NBA, these things matter, perhaps as much as what happens on the court. Johnson played in an era where the business of basketball was changing, but he remained old school to the core. Will Joe Johnson make the Hall of Fame? The numbers suggest he should be in the conversation. 7 All-Star appearances, over 20,000 points. Joe Johnson's forgotten prime isn't just about Joe Johnson. It's about how we consume basketball, how we create narratives, and how we decide which players deserve celebration. Johnson's career spanned a transformative period in sports media. When he entered the league in 2001, ESPN's SportsCenter was still the primary source of highlights and analysis. By the time he retired, players were creating their own platforms on social media, bypassing traditional media media entirely. Johnson never adapted to this new reality. No Twitter beefs, no Instagram workout videos, no podcast appearances telling his side of the story. Compare that to contemporaries like Dwayne Wade or Chris Bosh, who leveraged media opportunities to enhance their legacy. Or players like Kevin Durant, who used social media to control their own narrative, for better or worse. Johnson remained analog in an increasingly digital basketball world. The evolution of basketball itself also worked against Johnson's legacy. As the game moved toward pace and space, three-point heavy offenses, Johnson's methodical, mid-range game began to look antiquated. Analytics questioned the value of the very shots that Johnson had mastered. The contested mid-range jumper, the post-up against smaller guards. Analytics expert quote, "Johnson's game was efficient for its era but became the exact type of offense that modern analytics discourage. That doesn't make it less impressive. If anything, it's more remarkable that he was so effective with what we now consider suboptimal shot selection." Analytics expert, "We also can't ignore the market factor. Stars in New York, Los Angeles, or Boston received disproportionate coverage. Johnson spent his prime in Atlanta, the definition of a middle-market NBA city. How different would Johnson's legacy be if he had played those same 7 All-Star seasons with the Lakers or Celtics?" The question answers itself. Finally, there's the personality component. The modern NBA is a personality-driven league. From Charles Barkley to Dennis Rodman to Draymond Green, outspoken, controversial figures often receive outsized attention. Johnson's reserved demeanor, once considered professional, became a liability in an era that rewarded bold personalities. He let his game speak for itself. But in the modern NBA, sometimes your game isn't enough. Imagine Joe Johnson in today's NBA. Every step-back jumper would be a viral clip. His isolation efficiency would be celebrated by analytics departments. His calm demeanor might be marketed as cool under pressure rather than boring. Context shapes legacy as much as performance. And Johnson had the misfortune of being the right player at the wrong time. The NBA chose to forget Joe Johnson's prime. But we don't have to, because the real ones remember. The quiet assassin, the ISO king, the prime that deserved more. In a sports world that increasingly rewards the loudest voice in the room, there's something refreshing about a player who simply showed up, dominated his matchup, and went home. No self-promotion, no controversy, no excuses. 7 straight All-Star games, 6 straight 20-plus point seasons. Countless defenders left shaking their heads after another perfect step-back jumper. That's a prime worth remembering. That's a career worth celebrating. Joe Johnson may never get the recognition his career deserves. He may never make the Hall of Fame. His highlights may never go viral. But for those who watched him work, who saw the precision, the skill, the clutch performance night after night, we know that for a stretch from 2006 to 2012, Joe Johnson was one of the best players in the world. And that's worth remembering. If you remember Joe Johnson's game, drop a like on this video right now. If you believe stories like his matter, stories the mainstream basketball media has forgotten, subscribe to Fynk. We're dedicated to giving flowers to the players who deserve them. Next week, we're diving into another forgotten NBA story.